Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the merits of dead stop training. Now, when I say that dead stop training is valuable, I mean that a lot of times in your training you should do a lot of it, and there might be phases in your training to where you make very, very heavy reliance on it. In fact, I think for late novice lifters, it's a good idea to go through some phases of mostly dead stop type movements. But that doesn't mean it's the only thing you should do. And that's the thing that we always need to point out when we talk about something being a really valuable or useful tool, is that you'll get people who then assume that you're saying it's the only thing people should do. And that's one of the really bad habits people have in the lifting world. Right? It's like saying multi-joint exercises are amazing and should comprise the majority of your workout. And then people hear that's the only thing you should ever do. You should never do a single joint exercise, right? That's simply not true. But over to the point. Dead stop training. What do we mean? Deadlifts, perfect example. Things you'll see me do just in this video. Floor presses, glute bridges, barbell rows. Now, I call it a barbell row. Other people call it a Pendlay row. So why dead stop training? Dead stop training is a general rule where you have to lift a weight from a terminal stop, where you cannot use much outside inertia to get a weight started. You can't use a stretch reflex. It builds a lot of strength. It can build a certain type of strength, and it builds very, very valuable strength, particularly for purposes of contact sports, things like that, because the ability to instantaneously generate force. So think about on a deadlift, or think about on a glute bridge like this. What happens at the start? You don't have any stretch reflex at play. You don't really have much of a way to cheat. You have to instantaneously activate upper threshold fibers to get a heavy weight moving. Now, granted, I do in sets of 10s in the glute bridges, but that's still a heavy weight. I think that's, 465 on the bar for sets of 10. That's still a lot of weight to immediately explode off the floor. What has to happen there? Your glutes have to contract maximally to get the weight started. You have to dig in and hit upper threshold fibers to get a heavy weight moving from a dead stop. All right, this builds power. It builds stability. It teaches you how to learn to get tight and to brace. Because on either one of these lifts, if it's a pretty heavy weight, what's going to happen if you don't have your core braced tight? It's not going to move. It's not going to move. The other thing that happens, control. Not so much on the deadlift, but what about the glute bridge? If you just let it come crashing down, it hits the floor hard. It hits the floor hard. Same thing when we get to the floor press. If you let the weight just crash down on each rep, what happens on a floor press? You're going to bust your elbows. Look with the Pendlay row here. Because we're having to hit everything from a dead stop, we force the lats to get really engaged out of the bottom. Okay. On a Pendlay row, we stay tight. We use very, very little torso movement. Of course, I'm doing mine with the axle bar here. That's what I do. Your lats have to get the weight started out of the bottom. In other words, if you don't cheat or use any body English, your lats have to contract maximally in order to get that weight started. All right, there is a certain type of strength that we build when we move weights from a dead stop. Certain type of strength that we build. And again, as someone who does a lot of Pendlay rows, and people always comment on my back, Pendlay rows are largely responsible for my back development. Yes, I've gone through phases of other movements. I've done lots of chins, weighted pull-ups. But I always come back to the Pendlay row. And it's always been my mainstay. And it works. It works. And especially when you're really, really strict. Especially when you're really strict. But by that same token, some of these dead stop exercises, again, barring things like the deadlift, they teach you control. They teach you control, because a lot of times we think of these dead stop movements as brute strength, but they really aren't. Especially some of the more finessed ones. Take the deadlift out of the equation, which is brute strength. Watch the Pendlay row. It's a very controlled movement. You have to have a controlled explosion, and to do it correctly, your lats have to get really, really tight. You have to get tight. Same thing on a floor press. Look at the control involved. When you do a floor press correctly, you have to maintain a very, very high degree of tightness, because there's no stretch reflex, and it hurts if it hits the floor hard. You have to maintain tightness. The result, what happens when you look at EMG studies on the pecs? Floor press is superior to the bench press. Even for people who can't touch their chest, it works the pecs harder than the bench. Works the pecs harder than the bench. Because we have to maintain a very high degree of tightness and pectoral activation to control the weight. And then to reverse it out of the bottom without it slamming into the floor, we have to stay tight. The pecs have to stay engaged. Same thing again when you look at the Pendlay row, done correctly. Now, we can do Pendlays where we explode and drop it. We can do that. But when you control them like this, again, your lats have to stay fully engaged. Your lats have to stay tight, and they have to pop the weight off the floor. Okay, we build a very large amount of muscle activation on dead stop exercises. And also, if you do them correctly, the only one I'm showing here that has the ability to cheat is going to be, obviously, the Pendlay row. But if you look at the others, they make you honest with yourself, because it's hard to cheat. It's hard to use a stretch reflex on most dead stop movements. They force us to check our ego. I mean, and a deadlift does that too, because you can either break it off the floor and lock it, or you can't. Okay, dead stop exercises are humbling. They're humbling. Your ranges of motion are set. Right? You either put the weight back down on the floor on all these movements, or you don't. You either get it all the way to the top, all the way down, or you don't. There's no ambiguity. So what do we get out of them? We get a special type of strength. They build a special strength. They teach us how to start. They build starting strength. They build explosiveness from a dead stop. And oftentimes at our terminal ranges of motion, right? And that's sometimes the hardest part of movements, that terminal end. So these things teach us how to control weights, how to explode instantaneously under control. They teach us how to get tight. Because looseness kills strength. Looseness causes injuries. In the weight room. What about when you get into any sport? What happens when you get hit if you're loose? How do you get hit on a football field when you're loose? Learning to brace your body and get tight to increase muscle activation, because that's what we have to do with these. Build strength and stability through your whole body. Okay, so if you're trying to get all around strong, you're trying to develop everything top to bottom, these dead stop movements are tremendous. And if you think about it, they could be the foundation of a training block. Right? They could be a whole foundation of a training block. Because look at just the 4 movements I've done here. Throw in a box squat with that, which does the same thing. Trained everything. Every muscle in your body got worked to some extent. And I think dead stop training is something that more people need to incorporate. Right? It would behoove you to, particularly if you struggle with tightness and control. Right? If you struggle with tightness and control, you're wobbly, you're jerky, any of those things when you train, you don't have great stability, Start doing more dead stop exercises. You'll unlearn that. You'll unlearn that. Just a thing to remember, other than some of the stuff like the deadlift, obviously, they can be very humbling to your ego. All right, those of you who cheat when you bench, get under a floor press, it's going to humble you. All right, those who have ambiguous range of motion on your squat, box squat's going to humble you. But you will get very, very strong doing these exercises. And it's a different type of strength. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.